Friday night, I had the opportunity to attend the fundraiser for Salt and Light Radio here in Twin Falls. Salt and Light Radio actually has, though, a very big reach all the way up through the Boise region as well, and it may be growing. It is a Roman Catholic radio network. It also carries some of the programming from EWTN, which is, I would guess, the largest Catholic media operation outside of the Vatican now in the entire world. The most recognizable face from EWTN since the passing of Mother Angelica, the founder of the network, is Raymond Arroyo. He is the news director for EWTN, and he was here as the keynote speaker for the fundraiser. And we sat down for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, but about 15 minutes on tape before the dinner, and had a conversation about alternative media and the work of EWTN. You can take a listen. About 20, 25 years ago, I was talking to a priest friend, and we were having a conversation about media. And he was mentioning how he thought that in this day and age that we were about 50 years behind where the Protestants were, especially when it came to broadcast. And EWTN obviously was still fairly in its infancy at the time. And within 10 years, I remember having a conversation, this was maybe not even 10 years ago, with some friends who were organizing a 3-day Protestant religious festival, and they asked me to dinner so they could ask about inviting various personalities they'd seen on EWTN. And I thought, it's striking how in such a short period of time we saw this tremendous growth, but it also seeped into the culture as it did. Did you see that as well, being a participant?
Well, a big part of that was Mother Angelica. And unlike our Protestant friends, Mother Angelica was somebody who, though she was clearly in the Catholic world, she also had deep ties to the evangelical world and the secular community. She got her start with Pat Robertson on CBN. So that whole audience, an evangelical audience, knew her well before she started EWTN. Then when she started, she was on with Joan Rivers. She was on Bloopers and Practical Jokes with Dick Clark and Ed McMahon. She was in the middle. She was on Larry King. She was in the middle of the culture, weighing in on the big controversies. That is why I think it seeped in and spread wider, because her platform was wider. She was also a really funny, wise, and holy nun. And nuns are fun. People like, I think the secular culture kind of like nuns, as Sister Act and other things will attest. Nun Sense, that ongoing off-Broadway play. And Mother capitalized on some of that. She was a great storyteller. She reached people in their need, and she was really funny. And the combination of that, I think, allowed the network to grow. She was the bright light. She was the flagship show, and I think the face and the voice of EWTN. And even in death, she continues to be that, which is a challenge for EWTN.
I can recall, I graduated college in 1984, and my very first job just to earn a living was working an overnight shift in a hotel during the night audit. But my dad and my uncle were installing these things called satellite antennas. These were 8 to 12 feet around. So we had a demo actually at our house. And I would come home from work at the oddest hours, turn the television on, and there would be this woman in just a soft, calm voice who would be talking to me. And it was just transfixing to see that.
Yeah, well, that was part of her allure. Mother Angelica was a girl. She was Rita Rizzo, is her real name, born in Canton, Ohio, child of divorce. She experienced a lot of pain physically in her life. So when she became a nun, and then later, through happenstance and a lot of divine providence, ended up on television screens, she looked into that camera and she spoke to the heartache that not only the audience was experiencing, but that she had lived through herself. And that authenticity, wrapped in a deep spirituality coupled with humor, I think became an irresistible package. And people who otherwise would not listen to religious programming at all were suddenly transfixed because A, she was so funny, and B, it was so bizarre to see a little old nun on television talking in this way. I mean, she also spoke like the street.
Right.
She didn't talk like one of these gilded bishops in their pulpits. She cut right to it. She was Rita Rizzo from Canton, and she never lost that. That was, I think, her great gift to the Catholic Church and to the audience.
She spotted you at some point and suddenly just said, I need you.
Well, I like you, I was sent on assignment to do a magazine article on her for a friend in Washington who had a magazine. and he asked me to write a cover story. At the time, I was a Capitol Hill correspondent. I had done television. I came from a print background. I'd worked at the AP. I worked for Bob Novak in Washington. So they knew I bridged those two worlds, and they thought, well, this might be a fun subject for you. I didn't know who she was. I researched Mother Angelica. My mother and grandmother knew exactly who she was. They were in New Orleans and of course, big followers of Mother Angelica. We went down. I interviewed her for 2 days, and it was like I had known her my whole life. She was very much like my grandmother, very much in temperament like my Sicilian mother. Um, so strong women and Italian women were a part of my life. So I didn't worship her in the way so many, people, oh, mother, they get very pious around, which she hated. We talked as if we'd known each other forever and hit it off. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that we share an Italian heritage. And she asked me if I would start a news operation for her, and I said no. It was right after that first meeting. And she pursued me. We talked on and off, and she caught me in a weak moment and said, "You need to come down and do this. I need you to come do this." And I said, "Well, I'm recently married. I'm talking to other networks. I can't now." And she said, "Just come down and look. I'm arranging the flights for you. Come this weekend. Come and see."
What's interesting though is you being a child of the South, and she's trying to have this footprint in the South,
Yeah.
that you may have helped bridge that gap too.
Well, mother was building a national and had built by the time I came along. It was already a national fixture. It was everywhere, and because of the must-carry laws in cable television, EWTN was often side by side with other networks founded in the early '80s, like C-SPAN and CNN. In fact, mother shared an FCC attorney with Ted, what's his name, Ted
Oh, Turner.
Turner, who founded CNN. Um, and she founded it in the same year that Brian Lamb founded C-SPAN. So she really was a cable pioneer in many ways, but it was well established by the time I came along. I didn't come along until 1995. That's when I met her. So the network was already on the air 15 years by the time I waddled into the scene. But it was, she had a sense of people, though. Mother sort of could size you up really quickly. And and though we had bumpy times that I think made our relationship deeper, actually, um, we had a deep love and affection for one another.
I think about when I watch either EWTN or see any Christian network, the rest of the culture may not realize this, but when you're watching the news, it's almost exactly what you would see somewhere else. But for instance, if you're watching a Protestant network, they will have more of a focus on news out of the Middle East because of maybe their end times prophecy. But this is the one part of it is that it's not set up to report news from a doubtful perspective. Is that a good way to put that?
Well, I think the way I look at it is hopefully you're able to report things with a sensibility that focuses on people and the long-term consequences of the actions and the figures we're covering. So the emphasis that you're looking for and your sensibility as you approach the story is different. Subject matter, often the complex issues that you're dealing with, they're the same things everybody. It's healthcare, it's welfare reform, it's immigration policy. From my perspective, our coverage is pretty broad. I cover the culture. We cover movies coming out of Hollywood, Broadway shows, art exhibits, dance. I'll have everybody from Jerry Lewis to Mel Gibson to Dean Koontz on the show. So, but in each of them, I'm often able to mine topics and to dig deeper than you are allowed in other broadcast outlets.
I know we've got to get going here shortly for the dinner, but a couple of things that pop into my mind. One is you cover stories, though, that other people may not. This morning I noticed I got my daily email from a National Catholic Register, and there was the story about doctors saying it may not be a good idea to give these young people drugs who think that they have gender issues. And I'm not sure that gets attention in larger media, but it's getting some attention somewhere.
Well, I think again, see, I don't even see that as a Catholic or even a religious topic. That's a science topic. Now, I've interviewed Dr. Meg Meeker, who's a renowned child pediatrician. She's been doing this for 35 years. And she said something very interesting the other day. She said, many of the cases you deal with where you have people who have gender issues, she said much of this is normative, particularly in small children. And she said the frontal cortex of the brain does not really close entirely until one's about 21 or 22 years old, which is why the teenage mind and the child mind is an evolving, organic, free radical. So you have to guide it and tolerate for some things that might strike you as bizarre for a time. But the fact that a little boy is playing with a Barbie may not indicate that he's going to grow up to be, Cindy instead of Bob. It might just mean he's fascinated by the oddity of this doll right now. And you give him a month, he may leave it alone. But her argument was to rush in at that point, at that what she saw as a premature point, to overreact by giving that child drugs or surgeries is a bridge too far. And you really have to give time, allow time to elapse. And in her practice, and in many other, I've come across doctors at Johns Hopkins I've interviewed on this topic before, informally and otherwise. And they say they've never come across anybody in their practice of decades where there was an authentic gender issue, that it's a very rare thing. But from the coverage, it looks like something, and because of people like Caitlyn Jenner, one imagines that everybody on the block is dealing with a gender issue. Well, that may or may not be the case, and if you talk to the clinicians, they'll tell you it's not the case. So, but see, I don't see that as a particularly Catholic issue. I mean, I think when you're talking about doctrine and well, the church's teaching on marriage and Pope Francis's evolving teaching on that and what might or might not be happening, that's something that no one else is covering, that you can really bring light and shine light on. And not only Catholics are listening and watching, uh, Protestants are also looking very closely at this. I know other pastors have called me and said, "What is happening? Can you explain this to me?" They look to the Catholic Church as almost this lighthouse for preserving doctrine and holding to these to being the center of Christianity. And when it begins to move in a direction, the whole wider church moves with it. So I see that as a much larger story than even just a Catholic one.
One last thing, I cut my cord on cable a couple of months ago
Oh
and
boy.
decided to start looking for apps to fill the void. And I was shocked to see so many EWTN apps from around the world that were available for download. It truly is a worldwide ministry now.
It is. It's a global. I mean, we're in 350 million households around the globe and growing. That's just television. EWTN is a standalone shortwave network, one of the only non-government held shortwave networks in the world. We have a standalone Sirius channel. And then all of the AM/FM, there are 500 AM/FM affiliates across the country, and then there are wireless outfits in Europe that are carrying us. So the reach is tremendous. The challenge is, what do you populate those airwaves with? What is the mission now going forward? And I think every time, every era, every day, you have to reevaluate that because people aren't static. People move, they change, their needs change. And I don't, my show, the world over, I don't program with Catholics in mind. I program with people in mind. Some happen to be Catholic, but half of my audience is non-Catholic. I have Protestants, I have Jews, I have searchers, I have Zoroastrians. I've got everybody watching the show, which is interesting. The letters you get, um, how certain guests or topics impact different audiences that you didn't expect. That is a constant fascination to me. And I'm curious, like you, I'm curious. I love meeting people. Um, I'm enriched and I grow every time I meet somebody different, even people of different with different ideas, with different viewpoints and experiences. But to be able to bring them in a deep way and with time to a wider audience is a gift and one that I don't take lightly.
Raymond Arroyo is the news director for Eternal Word Television Network, known as EWTN. I should also point out he has he has a biography out of the network's founder, Mother Angelica, and it is just chock full of stories about how sometimes faith, even when it seems we're at our bleakest moments, if you have faith, you will get your answer. And too many people could say, well, that's a coincidence. There were so many things that happened in this woman's life as she was developing this network. You start to realize these huge coincidences that are happening. There has to be something else going on here. And he explained some of that during his remarks as he was the keynote speaker at the fundraiser for Salt and Light Radio here in Twin Falls on Friday night. which is a network building, a budding network, Catholic radio network here in Idaho. And I should point out they share some facilities with us here too, as well, at what we jokingly call Radio Ranch. But that was Arroyo and some of his comments about how it really is now an alternative source of media in a world where too much of the mainstream media is in lockstep and often going in a direction, well, far away from the culture. We've got more coming up in a moment. Should point out too, as well, when he mentions how many people are tuning in and watching his programming and listening to his programming, and for all the talk that the culture wars are over and our side lost, doesn't seem that way, does it? Going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court coming up in a few minutes. Bill Cowley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. It's 70.